Hi everyone, and welcome to our Trees and Bees conference. I'm standing here today at the site of our Business Innovation Centre Sunderland Pollinator Park as part of our Climate Action North Pollinator Parks project. And this is our contribution to trees and bees, because we are planting up mini meadows and flowers for pollinators, but also helping the trees along by just giving them a bit more complementary plants, but also helping the birds to nest in the trees as well. You can see just behind us about there we have bird boxes, or a bird box in the tree, which is hopefully going to be used by the blue ticks this year. It was certainly last year. So we would like to welcome you to today's Trees and Bees conference. We're running this conference just to raise awareness of the absolute necessity of trees and bees to mitigate the effects of the climate emergency, and also to inspire us to all think about trees and bees in a way that would help fight the climate crisis. So we're going to hear from some fantastic speakers today, some amazing people talking about the work that they're doing, and also some project showcase videos as well. So we hope you enjoy the day. Please do think about trees and bees in the concept of everyday life and take action to help. And also please do follow us on social media. We're running this conference today in partnership with our friends at Wildcraft, and please do interact with them as well today if you can. So enjoy the conference, be more tree if you can, use the hashtag, and we will see you soon.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Alistair Driver. I'm Director at Rewilding Britain, and it's a real pleasure for me to be speaking in this Trees and Bees conference. I have got some new information to share with you, which is very exciting for me personally. First time I've had the opportunity to share this new data and information. There's also a lot to report on how things are going in terms of rewilding. I want to update you on our network that we've set up, and also on various policy opportunities and indeed some successes in the last 6 months or so. So lots to talk about, and I'll rattle through it. First of all, I do always need to start my presentations with this premise, just to make sure we're all on the same page with this. I feel I can say this as somebody who's been involved in nature conservation for over 40 years and basically been trying to help deliver nature reserves and restored habitats across the country in my former roles with the Environment Agency and its predecessors. And I feel like, you know, that I can say this because of all that experience. What we've done, what thousands of people have done across the country for decades to try and restore biodiversity is not enough. We are still going backwards on biodiversity. We're still going backwards on climate change mitigation. We need to be doing something else as well as all that, not instead of, as well, additional. And that something else needs to be affordable and efficient. And rewilding is just that, I believe. So the next thing is to also be clear about the definition of rewilding. And this is our simplified definition from Rewilding Britain's perspective: large-scale restoration of ecosystems to the point where nature is allowed to take care of itself. And this serves to remind us that rewilding, the word, is a present participle. It's an ongoing process. It's going to take a long time, and we need to focus on the journey and not necessarily the ultimate destination. We need to focus on the rewilding, and we need to be doing this at scale. And if you're in a landscape like this, and you're looking 360 degrees all around you, then that's the kind of scale I'm talking about, truly landscape scale. I've been involved in lots of projects which we called landscape scale, but actually they weren't, because all you needed to do was turn in a different direction and you could see something completely different and probably not nearly as biodiverse as the area that we'd worked on. So this is the definition, and we need to remember this journey, this spectrum of activity that we need to undertake for a long time. And this is a graph which summarizes the journey we need to take, in effect, taken from Lawton It shows you management intensity on the vertical axis from low to high, and scale along the bottom axis. And at this point in time in Britain, most of our protected wildlife sites are quite small and are quite high up on that management axis. And most of our rewilding sites, and now, you know, I could populate this graph with a lot more blobs, which is great. But most of these rewilding sites are still quite small. They're less than 10,000 acres down in the bottom left-hand corner. And what we need to be doing is finding ways of joining them up, enabling bigger and better rewilding sites to develop, and gradually moving down towards that bottom right-hand corner of the spectrum. And if we were to get to that far right-hand corner, then we would have rewilded. We would have restored natural processes at scale to the point where nature is taking care of itself. But that's a very long way away, and we should focus on the journey, not the destination. These principles are principles that Rewilding Britain has put together, and you can find them on our website. You can find supportive text describing them. I will just quickly run through them now. Many people will have probably heard me talk about these before, but you know, it is very much about people. It's about working with local communities, local landowners, developing these initiatives from the bottom up. This is not something that can be or should be imposed on people. It needs to be driven from the bottom up, and it needs to be delivering benefits for those local communities, not just for wildlife in that environment, but for the human communities as well. It needs to be delivered at nature scale, and that's the size matters bit that I've just been talking about, kind of scale where you can measure the difference that you're making on the ground through delivery of ecosystem services, through biodiversity recovery, etc. And it needs to be at the scale where nature can lead. It needs to be at the scale where if you lose something in one corner of the site, there's every chance it's going to pop up somewhere else in a huge area because the circumstances suit it in that location rather than where it was originally. So that enables us to then move away from this micromanagement where we're trying to maintain certain things in small areas just because that's the only bit where they are likely to survive. So that's all about letting nature lead. It's got to be linked to economic resilience, and I will be sharing some information on that later in the talk. But you know, for this to work for us as a people, we have to make sure that it works economically. Remember, healthy environment equals a healthy economy, and the two are inextricably linked. And it has to be for the long term. You know, it's going to take a very long time for some of these benefits to be realized. We have to be patient. We have to be in it for the long game. I describe it as a marathon with a sprint start. So you know, we're undertaking a serious marathon here, but the sprint start is all about interventions, kick-starting the rewilding processes. So doing quite a lot early on to initiate this recovery, and then gradually easing off over time. Now, in terms of the ambition, Rewilding Britain has an ambition for at least 5% of core rewilding across the country. But it's very important to stress that this 5% needs to be connected and buffered by we believe at least 25% of nature-friendly farming and forestry, etc. And that constitutes the 30% that you will often hear governments and environmental organisations talking about. The 5% core rewilding, well, just to put it in perspective, it doesn't sound very much, but that's about 1 million hectares across Britain as a whole. And at the moment, the amount of rewilding is a fraction of 1%. Of what we call core rewilding. So we've got a very long way to go. We have this ambition to achieve this core rewilding by 2100, but we're, you know, very early stages. It's challenging but doable. Now, the first question that I often get asked in Q&As is all about food. It's the most common question. You know, you'll see things like, well, you know, how on earth are we going to feed the world or feed ourselves if we rewild everywhere? You know, well, the first thing to say is no one's proposing that we rewild everywhere. We've talked about 5%. that's challenging. But I'm now able to share some stats with you. This is the first of these green boxes that you will see in some of these slides, which illustrate the analysis of some of the figures that I've collated from over 20 rewilding projects that we now have in England, large-scale rewilding projects that we now have in England. And very interestingly, all 23 of the sites that I've looked at are still producing food. And in terms of livestock units, they are producing 54% of the livestock units they support, 54% of the livestock units they had pre-rewilding. And that is a very important stat, because it demonstrates, A, that they're still producing food, but actually B, that they're still producing quite a lot, approximately half. And you've got to remember that most of these, the vast majority of these sites are on grade 4, grade 5 or non-agricultural land anyway, so they're pretty marginal sites. And interestingly, the entire reduction in livestock units is down to sheep numbers. In actual fact, the numbers of beef cattle and pigs and ponies have all gone up. But here it's sheep that are taking the hit, if you like, with numbers down to just 6% of rewilding, pre-rewilding figures overall. So that's where the key change is. But then if you compare that with national stats, there are something like 30 million sheep in Britain. And I've done the calculations on the 5%. And if we were to deliver 5% in the same way as we've delivered these 23 sites so far, then you'd see a 1.3% reduction in sheep numbers across the country. And I've checked other impacts on sheep numbers and other factors. It's quite clear that other factors would dwarf that 1.3%. Factors like market forces and changes as a result of Brexit, etc. But that's the reality. We've got to be honest about it. That's where the key changes are, and very interesting to see that actually other animal numbers have gone up slightly on these rewilding sites overall. Now, Rewilding Britain's got a revamped website since I last spoke to Sharon's excellent Climate Action Northeast Conference. We've revamped the website. We've now put additional information on there related to the marine environment, related to how you can make your garden wilder, etc. Rewilding on a small scale, it's all there. Please check it out. We don't want to exclude anyone from this discussion and this ambition. Everyone can contribute in a small way, but when it comes to significant rewilding and rewilding principles, obviously it does need to apply at scale. But we can all do a bit, and here's some guidance on our website of how you can do that. And we've set up the Rewilding Network. That happened in November last year, and already we have 28 case study projects on there, member projects as we call them. And local networks as well, and over 200,000 acres of rewilding. All of these projects are either in England and Scotland. As yet, we don't have anything from Wales. And as I say, there are case studies for each of the projects. These are signified by green flags on the map that I'm showing you here. And there's a small amount of information about each project and a link then to the project's own website, so you can find out more about it. And you will see a huge range of case studies. There's individual private estates, there are farms, there are areas of land owned by water companies or the National Trust, sites managed by NGOs, MOD sites, managed realignment sites around the coast. There's a whole variety of rewilding projects on there. And we have these local networks as well developing. Again, the majority are in England and Scotland. They're shown in blue flags here. And these are usually around sort of county scale networks where they are starting to bring together to explore rewilding opportunities at that sort of scale. And they are linked in to us through this national rewilding network. And then to support them, we are developing these opportunities for learning and connecting people. And so these are the ambitions of this rewilding network that we've set up. that talks about providing toolkits and setting up webinars and targeted discussion groups, fora, etc., building evidence and sharing it, sharing best practice, sharing mistakes, sharing problems, challenges. It's a standard kind of network ambition, and it really is starting to fly now. They've already had several fora activities, and the numbers are growing all the time. So if you're interested in rewilding your own land that you are considering rewilding on, please do join in. It's free to join and free to take part. Now I want to show you a couple of animations. People often want to know, what does rewilding look like, and really there are two key ways of doing this. One, you can take photos of an existing landscape and then create artist impressions to show how that landscape might change, or ideally one has animations that show it changing over time. And we've got a couple of simple animations here. This one's courtesy of our friends at NEP, who commissioned this one of how things might change in a lowland environment. And so we're starting with what is very much a farmed landscape, in infrastructure very evident, channelized river running through the landscape, and showing the change over time. And what's important to realize is there's still going to be grazing animals in this landscape. But importantly, we start with connectivity, starting to connect little pockets up across and through and over infrastructure, between barriers, and then gradually building a mosaic of habitats where opportunities provide themselves, particularly in floodplains and river corridors. Very important to try and restore habitats in those environments. You get very rapid transitions in wetland environments, and that helps to provide seed sources for other areas further afield. And so this is the sort of scene that one might encounter in a large-scale rewilding initiative. As I say, still some quite managed elements in that landscape, but core areas of rewilding, teeming with wildlife, and of course with all those sorts of species that we'd love to see back in our landscape. But still accepting that in a densely populated country, there's still going to be infrastructure visible in many areas, and we just need to try and find ways of helping this ecosystem to function naturally in and amongst all of that. And in an upland situation, we start with this scene, and this is a scene that I've encountered many times. I based this the thoughts that I gave to the animator based on photos that I'd taken in the Peak District and in the Pennines and the Lake Districts, etc. So bowling green short hillsides, channelized rivers in valley bottoms, regimental compartmentalized fields, very rigid conifer, non-native conifer plantations that don't really blend in with the landscape, moorland burning, eroding peat hags, wildlife visible, but usually the wildlife's very generalist stuff like crows and foxes and etc. So that's a fairly typical starting point, and we transition. There's only 3 images in this particular animation, but we transition excuse me, through a landscape which initially is obviously removing non-native plantation, allowing natural regeneration, still with grazing animals in the landscape, but fewer number and a greater variety, and restored rivers, natural regen starting to spread even further up hillsides, this feathering of vegetation from existing clumps of woodland. And you'll still see human activity in that landscape. Remember, as I said, man belongs in this environment. Can it belong there without detrimentally impacting on natural processes? So that's the kind of scene we would expect to see. And indeed, there are photos now that I show in presentations of landscapes that look quite similar to this in some of the best upland rewilding projects in England and Scotland. Unfortunately, of course, they still miss certain charismatic megafauna like the lynx, but who knows, maybe one day. So that's kind of scenes we would see in uplands. Now moving on to the benefits of rewilding, just to summarize those. It's not just about biodiversity benefits, of course. Rewilding, restoring natural processes can deliver so much in terms of flood risk management, water quality, carbon sequestration, health and well-being, etc., etc. And so gathering more and better evidence is really, really important. And so as part of the assessment of these projects, I did ask the landowners whether monitoring was taking place on their land. And bear in mind, it's quite difficult for private landowners to find the time or the resources to make this happen. But I'm delighted to say that all of the 23 projects that I had looked at are doing some form of monitoring. Most of them are doing biodiversity monitoring, as you can see, 21 of the 23. But there are some that are doing usually through links to universities and other organisations like Natural England. They are doing other assessments on soils and water, etc. So more and better evidence is emerging all the time. I've just given you a couple of snippets here, which are bits of evidence I gathered when I was in the EA and promoting catchment restoration. But we are looking in Rewilding Britain, we are looking to develop that evidence base even further. There's quite a lot of stuff that's out there, but in disparate places and needs bringing together into one place, but also converting into easily understandable, punchy language. And then there are the economic opportunities, which are, again, very significant. This data that I've gathered is probably the most important. If I had to pick one piece of data and information that's emerged from this analysis of these sites, I had data for 22 of the 23 sites relating to jobs, and those jobs overall increased by 47% across those sites compared with when they were being traditionally farmed beforehand. And that, you know, that is not what a lot of people would expect. I expected some increase because I've seen the people doing these jobs on these sites, and I know actually that farming these days is quite a lonely existence. There aren't many people involved in farming large areas of land, but clearly this is a result of diversification. If you are diversifying your sources of income and diversifying the degree of interest on the site, then you will probably be able to generate new opportunities, and that's exactly what's happening. That's a very significant increase, and I just shared it with government officials, and of course they are very, very interested because, you know, they are looking to promote a green economy and green jobs. The other thing to emphasize here is the volunteer engagement. This is another really important aspect because there will be a direct correlation between volunteer activity and health and well-being for those people. You know, being engaged and involved in a site which is doing great things for the natural environment, I know because I've had the pleasure of doing stuff like that in my spare time, is wonderfully rewarding and makes you feel good. And so there's the physical and the mental benefits of that. And even this figure shocked me too, you know, that it's gone up nearly 9-fold from 50 to 428 volunteers on these 19 sites for which we had data. So, you know, really, really good news information. And here are just some of the examples of the sorts of activities which some of these rewilding sites are starting to focus on. Every site has its own slightly different emphasis, but they are all engaging in other job opportunities other than just farming. By the way, they've still all got people who farm or people who look after livestock, but they may have slightly fewer of those overall, but then they've got lots of other new job activities and volunteer activities going on as well. Now, I just want to talk a little bit before I finish about policy opportunities. And these are very, very significant. You know, I describe this environmental land management scheme opportunity as the single most important legislative change that we've had in my lifetime in terms of this opportunity to restore biodiversity in a significant way, because it relates to how we manage our land and water. And I have spent, since the last time I saw Sharon and team, I spent much of that time on behalf of Rewilding Britain, encouraging government to include rewilding in the future environmental land management scheme. And I, it's been so powerful to me to be able to use the actual examples, which I've showcased a few of in this presentation, to be able to demonstrate to government that it is happening and these are the benefits of it. And these people are doing it willingly, but they are going to need support through an incentive scheme in future. And I'm delighted now to see that the government has listened. And in the Farming is Changing booklet, which they issued in December for landowners, rewilding is mentioned as one of the things that government is prepared to support through what they call the landscape recovery component of the environmental land management scheme. I'm just undergoing exactly the same approach in Wales now, because they are now consulting on the agricultural bill in Wales. And again, although they may not accept the word rewilding in Wales because it's more of a sensitive word there, I certainly hope they will accept the principles that underpin it. And that's, as I say, all about landscape scale restoration of natural processes. And this is a simple schematic of how it might fit together. I've used the old terminology of ELM scheme 2 and 3 here, but essentially you're talking about core rewilding areas in green being buffered by and connected by what we call nature-friendly farming. This is the 5% and the 25% that I talked about earlier in the presentation, and this crudely shows how it might work geographically, if you like, on the ground. And this 30% figure, well, this is being bandied around quite a lot now by environmental organizations and by government, but it's very important that government especially, recognize that the 30% means high quality nature, high quality, not existing national park nature, but actually genuinely biodiverse, nature rich environments. And that's the challenge. It's all very well having these numbers, but it's the quality that really matters now. And then we have we've just had the England Tree Strategy consultation recently, and our key emphasis in that dialogue has been about ensuring that government understands that natural regeneration should sit alongside tree planting as an ambition for any tree strategy. Sorry, just go back to that slide. So here is just confirmation that yes, tree planting has a role to play. This wonderful example that many of you will have seen before from Carafran, showing the amazing development of woodland as a result of planting 500,000 trees, is a great example. There are places where the seed sources are so sparse or so distant or not diverse enough that planting is necessary. And indeed, as this stat shows, 10 of the 23 projects I've looked at do involve tree planting as one of several interventions. But as this example shows from NEP, and I'll run this a couple of times because it's quite rapid, but as this natural regen example shows, you don't need to plant trees in every situation. In very productive environments with lots of good tree seed sources nearby, you just need to let nature do its thing. And I know that Izzy will be talking about this today, but this shows you the NEP example with an arable field with healthy hedgerows and oak trees, etc. in those fruit and nut rich hedgerows. It shows exclusion of animals initially. There's also the breaking up of land drains, so you'll see water sitting in this land as the animation progresses. But this, over a 15-year period, shows a remarkable transition from bare arable land through natural regeneration to a wonderful mix of woodland, scrub, wetland and grassland. And that's fantastic, you know, that, and it also is much more resilient than an area that would be planted with loads of trees brought in from elsewhere. So we have been at pains to emphasize to government that natural regen should be the default solution for a tree and woodland strategy, with assisted regeneration. In other words, maybe the ploughing of fields or the harrowing of land, scarifying to allow seed to germinate, or indeed the scattering of seed if there aren't suitable seed sources nearby, or perhaps a mix of allowing natural regeneration but then supplementing with planting because certain species are completely absent from that environment. It's a whole mix. It's not a binary choice here. It's going to be, in most cases, a mix of solutions, with tree planting as the last resort. And as you would expect, all of the rewilding projects are allowing natural regen as part of their initiative. And indeed, if they weren't doing that, then I don't think I could call them rewilding projects, to be quite honest. And then there are natural flood management opportunities, which are, to be honest, we're just scratching the surface with them at the moment. You know, although we have 3 coastal rewilding projects on the network, and they were part of those that I assessed, and of course they are linked to shoreline management plans because they are managed realignment schemes. But actually, inland, only one of the 23 sites is linked with an Environment Agency natural flood management program, and that's not the fault of the sites. That's because we have not adopted the natural flood management policy, which I helped the Environment Agency to produce six years ago now. That still hasn't been properly adopted and is still very piecemeal. So we've still got a long way to go. Less than 1% of the flood risk management budget nationally is spent on natural flood management. And in my view, it should be at least 10%, if not greater. So that's an area we all need to be encouraging more effort on. And then there are various other initiatives, policy opportunities. I haven't got time to dwell on the details of these, but one I'd like to flag is that Natural England, have really grasped the nettle on this and are now looking to identify national nature reserves for rewilding, for restoring natural processes at scale and measuring the changes and benefits they bring. That's great. We have the opportunity through the biodiversity net gain system to include rewilding opportunities in peri-urban areas, for example. And then there are things like the carbon trading markets and water company price reviews. All of these are major opportunities to deliver more for rewilding through policy mechanisms. And I just wanted to flag this one stat here. A lot of people say to me, well, if my land's triple SI, I'm not going to be allowed to rewild it. Am I not supposed to be preserving it in aspic? Well, actually, no, that's not the case. As you can see, over 50% of the area of these rewilding projects is designated, and the landowners have successfully negotiated changes with Natural England. So it's actually not such an obstacle as was first thought. And various other opportunities, and I particularly just want to touch on species reintroductions here. There was something like, I think it's 26 different species cropped up when I interviewed these sites about their reintroductions. 26 individual species have been or are being planned to be reintroduced. By far the most popular is the beaver, of course, but they are still just in enclosures. So, we still need to make progress with government on releases to the wild, and I hope that will come soon. Another popular species, a white stork, and one of my favorites, of course, the water vole species I spent so many years trying to conserve. And then technology. I mean, look at this, the virtual fencing opportunities where you have GPS collars on cattle that enable you to stop them going to areas where you don't want them to go to, like e.g. a neighbour's land, for example. That's a significant technological advance that will contribute towards making rewilding easier for landowners in future. So I will end there, folks. I'll leave you with this great cartoon from Ralph Underhill. I've talked a lot about rewilding the land. but actually rewilding our thinking is really what we need to major on now. And if we're still thinking like this, where we frown on the reintroduction of a beaver, which can do so much for humanity and so much for biodiversity, whilst releasing tens of millions of non-native pheasants into the countryside without blinking an eye, then we've got a long way to go, haven't we? Therein lies the challenge. Thanks, folks.
I'm really thrilled to be contributing to the Bees and Trees conference and to be introducing our little animation about natural regeneration. Getting away from the sort of tree planting model is something that we've become incredibly keen on here at NEP in the Rewilding project here, from what it's really demonstrated to us about how nature can bounce back, about how trees can establish themselves without human participation. You can see here behind me an oak that's regenerating in the middle of thorny scrub, and the thorny scrub here is providing a nursery. It's nature's barbed wire. It's providing a fantastic microclimate for this tree to grow, just about the right amount of moisture and protection from wind and sun and damage as it grows, but also stimulating the connections with mycorrhizal fungi to its roots as the sapling grows. So this kind of natural evolution for a tree is the best start in life it could possibly think of. We've seen thousands and thousands of oaks regenerating here, not just oaks. We've seen ash, alder, wild service, crabapple, you name it, just spontaneously arriving here and finding a natural place to regenerate, protected by this thorny scrub, which protects them from browsing by deer and rabbits, and of course at NEP from all our other free roaming animals as well. So what's important here is that we have spent there's been no direct financial or carbon costs in establishing these trees. So no spades in the ground, no importing of commercial saplings produced in commercial nurseries, possibly from abroad, which could bring in disease. No polypropylene tubes and tannalized wooden stakes connected with plastic ties, and all the transport costs of getting those saplings to site in the first place. None of that has happened here. It's just happened completely naturally. Another hugely important thing we have to think about when we're imagining and planning for how we're going to establish trees in our landscape again is the issue of genetic diversity. This is enormously important if we are going to safeguard the resilience of our trees for the future in the face of climate change and disease and pollution. Nothing that human beings can do in terms of propagation or planting can ever replicate the genetic diversity of wild trees like these. And the joy of allowing natural regeneration like this is something that we've experienced here at NEP, is just the sheer pleasure in the unexpectedness of it all. Somehow it provides a sort of spirit of place. Nature is providing the trees where it wants the trees to be. And that's something that is often more surprising and more interesting than anything we could have planted ourselves. So one of the main ideas, I think, that is really holding back natural regeneration is the way we expect our landscape to look, the sort of tidy, neat blocks of trees that we're used to. If we're going to embrace natural regeneration as the default mechanism for establishing trees in our landscape, which is something that both Kew and Rewilding Britain are advocating, then we have to free our minds a lot more about what woodscape is, what woodland is, and in particular to allow ourselves to get messy, to let a sort of exuberant thorny scrub establish as a nursery for our trees. Thorny scrub, is something that we have zero tolerance for in our landscape today, and that really has to change if we're to welcome wild trees back into our countryside. So I hope you enjoy our little animation and have a fantastic day at the conference. And so goodbye from NEP on one of the coldest days of the year.
Hi there, everybody. My name's Alan, and I want to talk to you today about the link between aspen trees and bees. Aspens are one of my favourite trees, and this is information about something I observed many years ago, but I've never shared it in the public before. So this conference on trees and bees seems like an ideal opportunity to do that. So I'm just going to switch on my presentation and get going. So it's about aspen trees and honeybees. And here you can see a photograph of bees at the entrance to their nest hole in an aspen tree. And I'm not going to come back to that till almost to the end of the presentation, because I want to give you some information about aspen first of all, because it's a special tree which is one of my favorites, and it's relatively unrepresented in the forest in Scotland and in fact throughout Britain today. In the past it would have been much more abundant. So here's a beautiful picture of aspen trees at Dundragon, which is the 10,000 acre estate that Trees for Life, the charity I founded, bought in 2008. And you can see an old granny pine there and some beautiful colours in early autumn. So aspen is interesting for a number of reasons. Here's a few features of it. It's a fast growing pioneer species, so it's one of the early colonizers of open ground. Its leaves have flat petioles, those are the stems that the leaves are on, and because they're flat, that makes them dance in the slightest breeze. So aspen is known for its shimmering leaves. It turns beautiful shades of bright yellow or sometimes red in autumn, and it grows clonally. So what that means is that the roots of an aspen tree send up suckers and they form new trees, but they're still connected through the roots to their parent. So many stands of aspen, they look like separate trees, but they're actually all one organism. They're all connected through their roots. Now, aspen hosts a unique range of special lichens, mosses, invertebrates, and fungi, and various other species, which I'll cover in just a moment. And unfortunately, it rarely flowers in Scotland. So there's very little seed produced, and this is one of the problems we have because it's disappeared from most locations, and with no flowers and no seeds, it can't get back. It reproduces mainly from root suckers. So just a few characteristics in more detail. One of the features about it that's very noticeable is it's the last tree to get its new leaves every spring. So after birch and oak and everything else is leafed out, aspens will still be bare. And in the Highlands, it's sometimes early June before the new leaves appear. And you can see them just emerging from a bud in one of these photographs. Those on the right are the new ones. When they have emerged, they're a beautiful bronze colour. But aspen has probably the shortest length of time of any broadleaf deciduous tree in leaf each year, because it's late getting its leaves, and it also tends to lose them quite early in the autumn before many other species. So it has a very short period in leaf each year. Now it compensates for that, interestingly enough, by having chlorophyll in its bark, and you can see examples of that in these photographs here. The bark has a greenish tinge to it in many instances, and that is because the chlorophyll there enables the tree to photosynthesize, particularly when it's leafless. So when it's in leaf, there's not so much light striking the trunks, but when it's leafless in the early spring, late autumn in particular, it's able to photosynthesize, and that compensates for its limited time with leaves. I mentioned about it reproducing by suckering. So the suckers are technically called ramets, and they grow off the roots of a parent tree. On the left, you can see the parent tree in the background and lots of suckers in the foreground. And on the right, you can see a line of suckers very clearly showing where the roots of the tree, which is out of picture, grow in a straight line. Now, these suckers are only able to grow where they're protected from herbivores, because aspen, one of its other features is it's one of the most palatable species of all for herbivores like deer and sheep. Deer will eat it before anything else, except for maybe rowan. So that's made aspen very rare. Because it doesn't produce seeds, when old trees die, the root system dies as well, there's no new growth, and it cannot recolonize the lost ground where it formerly occurred. When the suckers are able to grow, though, you get something like this. This is in a gorge in Glencannick, and here there's a big aspen tree in the centre. It was reckoned to be over 200 years old. It's now blown down, unfortunately, but all the young trees around it are ones that have grown off the roots of that old one. It was probably the only tree there 200 years ago, and its suckers managed to get away, producing this aspen stand, which we call a clone. A group of aspens that are all genetically the same organism connected through their roots. So that's pretty rare to see something like that. Generally, you have to have inside a fence or very low numbers of herbivores for the suckers to get established. So moving on to some of the species that are associated with aspen, there's a number which are quite rare and are focuses for conservation plans, so they're on the Biodiversity Action Plan and so forth. So this is one, the aspen bristle moss. This only occurs at a few sites in northeast Scotland, and it's exclusive to aspen. It doesn't occur anywhere else. This one is on the Findhorn River, not that far from where I live, actually. On a smaller scale still, this is a twig of a mature aspen, and these tiny little pins that you can see there with little heads on them are pinhead lichens, a species with no common name. Its Latin name Phyllocalicium praesidens is a bit of a mouthful. They're about 1 millimeter in size, so they're really tiny, and they only occur in the twigs of mature aspens. There's not many records of them, but that's partly a result of the fact that it's very hard to survey for them. How do you examine the twigs of a mature aspen? They're generally up in the tree, high up, and out at the end of branches, so it's very difficult to access. These were photographed on an aspen tree that had blown down, and the twigs were at eye level, so it was easy to find them. There's lots of invertebrates associated with aspen, and there's a particular group called saproxylic insects. Those are insects that breed in dead wood. And there's a whole group of them that depend on dead aspen wood. This is one, a hoverfly called Xylota tarda. The adult's on the left and the tiny larva is on the right. And these again are the subject of specific conservation measures because they're very rare. Again, because aspen is so scarce in Scotland. Another one which is quite well known is the dark-bordered beauty moth, Epione vespertaria. Again, you see the larva on the left, the caterpillar, and it feeds on young aspen suckers on the new leaves, the bronze leaves that we saw earlier. So it feeds on those in early spring or late spring when the aspen comes into leaf, and then the adult on the right there. And this is aspen specific and very rare in the UK, but it also occurs in mainland Europe. And this one photograph here of the adults, the only photograph in this presentation that's not mine, it's from somebody, got it off the internet, Ian Leach. So thank you for that. Other species are a bit more well known and not specifically dependent on aspen and also feed in other trees. The poplar hawk moth is a good example, and look at the superb camouflage of this here. This is an almost mature caterpillar, and you can see the pattern on it, the lines, the spots, and even the little tail spike, which mimics the petiole, the leaf stem of the aspen leaf that it is feeding on. Superb camouflage. Other insects don't necessarily rely on camouflage, but there's lots of them that feed on aspen leaves. There's two here, just as an example. The black ones are the larvae of leaf beetles, Fratora vitellini. There's two species in that genus that feed on aspen, and you can see they're munching their way across the surface of the leaf here, leaving this skeletonized section behind. And next to them are some tiny aphids, one of a number of species of aphids that are specific to aspen. Aspen also has various species that induce galls on it. There's 3 here. The photograph on the left shows 2 different species. The one at the top, where the leaf meets the petiole, is induced by a mite, and the others are induced by midges. They form these discs that penetrate, or these spheres that penetrate through the galls. And on the right, another mite gall, very spectacular, sometimes called the cauliflower gall, produces these remarkable growths on the twigs. There's also various fungi that live with aspen. Many of them are associated with other trees as well, but this particular one, the orange bolete, Lexinum ariantecum, is specific to aspen in Scotland. So the only time you'll find it is near aspen trees, and it grows with a relationship connected through the roots of the tree to the mycorrhizal hyphae of the fungus, and they exchange nutrients to support each other. This is a very rare fungus. which was unknown in Scotland till I found it in Glenmoriston in 2013, 8 years ago, on dead aspen wood, Calophylla eruciformis, very tiny, and again, no common name. This is the first UK record for it. And this is a much larger species. This is the handiwork or the tooth work of the European beaver. And aspen is a key food for beavers as well. They rely on it for a lot of their food in winter. The bark of aspen has salicylic acid in it, which is one of the things that beavers like to eat. So they'll chew willows and aspens. And this is a big aspen tree on the Beaulieu River west of Inverness. And you can see the beavers have really had a good go at it there. And now that we've got beavers back in Scotland and now in some sites in England too, we need more aspen trees. Very important to have the food source for them. So unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, aspen has disappeared from most of its range. Like the rest of the trees in Scotland, it's been cleared through historic deforestation, and its return is prevented by deforestation. So here you see a couple of examples. In many situations in Scotland, the only aspen trees that remain are on rock outcrops or cliffs where they're inaccessible. And when Trees for Life started surveying for aspen in the early 1990s, we kept finding them on south-facing rocky cliffs, and we thought that was their preferred habitat. Not true, they'll grow in other sites, but that's where they've been confined to by the pressure of herbivores. So you can see in situations like this, these trees, they rarely flower. If they do flower, maybe once every 20 years or something, the nearest neighbor tree will be miles away. So there's no chance of pollination and therefore no seed production. And all the suckers that grow off the roots of these trees get eaten by deer, and eventually the tree dies out and it disappears from more of its range. So that's the problem that we've got. It shouldn't be like that. This is not a Scottish photograph. This is taken in southwest Norway, where some of us from Trees for Life and others, including David Hetherington, who's also giving a talk in this conference, we went there in 2015 to look at the recovering forest there. Because 100 years ago, Norway in the southwest was as deforested as the Highlands. But when people left voluntarily from Norway to go to the US, where they were offered free land in Minnesota and states like that, the forest recovered naturally, and it's been a spontaneous natural regeneration of forest in southwest Norway for about 100 years. And in that forest, aspen is very prevalent. And this is taken in late May, and you can see here birch trees with new leaves, some pines in the top left, but on the center, all the aspen trees are still leafless. And look how many there are there. And I estimated informally from traveling around Norway that aspen was the third most numerous tree after pine and birch there, and maybe constituted up to 25% of the woodland. So when you think about what we've got in Scotland today, where it's tiny, it's very rare, this is what we should be having. And this is what we should be seeing once the forest begins to recover. So that's kind of the background on aspen. And I want to focus on a specific species, which is key to this linkage between aspen trees and honeybees that the talk is really about. And it's called the aspen bracket fungus. And this species was unknown in Scotland. There were no records for it until 2000. And then some were found in Strathspey. And since then, particular searches have been carried out to look for it. And it's actually been shown to be quite widespread. And it's a woody fungus, occurs only on aspen trees, and it will persist for many years on the trunks like you see here. Here's some details of it. On the left, it's got pores. You can see on the underside, that's where the spores are released from so it can reproduce. And on the right, you can see the bracket there on the trunk of that aspen tree, and right next to it, the bark has fallen away because the tree has died. And this fungus causes aspen trunk rot, which rots the heartwood of the tree, leading to its weakening and to its eventual death. Now that may sound like a bad thing, especially where we've got not so many aspen trees in Scotland, but actually this is a natural process, and this is an integral part of the life cycle of many organisms, including those insects that breed in dead aspen wood. The fungus helps those insects by creating the dead aspen wood that they need to live in. So the aspen bracket fungus, it affects older aspen trees, 50 years or more in general. Young trees don't seem to get affected so much. And the brackets or fruiting bodies, they only appear about 5 years after the tree has been infected by the fungus. So by the time you see the fungus here on the outside, it's already busy rotting the heartwood of the tree. These brackets can persist for up to 20 years. And the concentric rings on them, which you can see above the pores there, indicate a year of growth. So it's a bit like tree rings in a way. You can tell how old these brackets are by looking at the rings, and this one probably has 4 or 5 years of growth on it there. So this fungus is busy rotting the aspen tree. Now this same fungus also occurs in North America, and because North America has intact forests with healthy functioning ecosystems, things have been studied much more there. And Phellinus tremulae there affects quaking aspen, which is Populus tremuloides. Our aspen is Populus tremula. The American one, Populus tremuloides, they're very similar. And those two trees actually cover all the northern forests of the world, from Siberia through to Scotland and North America. Those two closely related trees occur. And this fungus occurs throughout that range, affecting both of them. So in North America, where there's a lot more aspen stands, big ones, and the fungus is more prevalent because of that, they've been able to document that as it rots the tree and creates holes and things in it, a number of species use it, including flying squirrels, bats, boreal owls, woodpeckers, and red-naped sapsuckers, which are close relatives of woodpeckers. They suck the birds that suck the sap of trees. So this fungus is quite widespread, and it's been much better studied in North America than here. It occurs elsewhere too. This is back in southwest Norway on an aspen tree there. And this is a woodpecker having its nest hole in an aspen tree. And we saw in the previous slide that woodpeckers take advantage of aspens that have been infected by the fungus. So this is an example of that in southwest Norway. This is it in Scotland at Dundragon. And this is the stand of aspen trees that were in the opening picture, showing the brightly coloured aspens in autumn. So in North America, the results of research have shown that woodpeckers preferentially nest in these aspen trees infected by the fungus. And that makes sense if you think about it, because the fungus weakens the tree and it rots the heartwood. So it's an easier job for a woodpecker to excavate out a nest hole. So on the left here, this is before we even purchased Dundragon, when I was going out to survey the site in 2005, found evidence of this bracket on the aspen tree there. And then 7 years later, photographing the same tree from a slightly different angle, found 4 different nest holes of woodpeckers in it. So obviously in that 7 years, the fungus had weakened the tree significantly, and then woodpeckers had made succession of nests in them. So the fungus also causes the trees to die. It weakens them and kills them outright, or makes them more susceptible to storm damage. And in December 2013, this is on the left, a different aspen stand at Dundragon. A major storm hit, blew this tree down completely, snapped its trunk off, as you can see. And on the right, the same stand that we've seen in the previous couple of photographs, one of the trunks snapped off, and it snapped off right where the bracket fungus is. And you can see the bracket fungus on the left as well here. So that picture on the right, especially showing the tree snapped off right where the fungus is, demonstrates that the tree has been weakened by the presence of this bracket fungus for so many years. There it is in close up there. So it was great to observe this, to actually see this, and understand what was going on here. So here's a sequence then showing the 3 things over a period of 8 years, the impact of this fungus on the trees. So on the left, back in July 2005, the early stages of the infection, well, probably been there for 5 or 6 years by that time at least, because it's fruiting. The aspen trees with the woodpecker holes in the middle, and then the damage to the tree after the storm in 2013. That wasn't the end of the story though, because the following year, a few months after the storm, I was out on Dundragon one day walking past these trees, and I discovered this. This is a section of a wasp's nest on the ground directly underneath the aspen trees that were damaged by the storm. And if you look in the right-hand picture in particular, you can see there are still some wasp larvae inside the cells of the nest. Now, I don't know exactly what happened here, but it's a fair assumption that this nest was in a cavity in the aspen tree, and it got exposed by the storm breaking the tree. And it could have fallen out by itself, but I think it's probably more likely that it was raided by something like a pine marten, because there are pine martens at the time living very close to where this tree was. And pine martens are known to go up and raid, you know, bees' nests and things like that. So that was the kind of the chain of linkage there. The fungus on the aspen tree, the woodpecker nests, and possibly potentially these wasps nesting there as well. So what does this have to do with honeybees then? After all, this is the title of the talk. So let's get on to that now for the final part here. So this is a different aspen stand at Dundragon, probably 200 or 300 meters away from the one we've been looking at. And this one is very interesting because the trees there are characterized by these swollen bulbous shapes on the trunks, or burls, as they're known in North America. And they're a bit of a mystery. We don't know what's caused them. Fungal experts have come and looked, and it's not a fungus. It may be a virus, but it's possible the tree's been weakened as well by that. But on the right, you can see very clearly there in the middle, a woodpecker nest hole. So the same thing again, the woodpeckers taking advantage of a weakened tree to build their nest there. And these were taken in 2006. And here you can see on the left the female great spotted woodpecker, and on the right the male with his little red cap there, bringing food to their chicks which were in the nest at the time. Here's a closer view of the male. Look how many caterpillars he's caught to take to his chicks there. So the thing about woodpeckers is that they rarely reuse their same nest sites. They tend to make and excavate a new one each year. And it may be that's because when they occupy a nest site, they, like most birds, they get infested with feather lice. And those feather lice probably stay in the nest. And it's often theorized that birds that, like woodpeckers that make nests in cavities, move to a different site every year to avoid a buildup of these lice that would otherwise affect their health. So these woodpeckers were there in this nest site here on this aspen tree. And one of the other trees in the aspen stand several years later, when the fungus might have had more effect on it, we were doing a survey for sawflies in this area, and we heard a lot of buzzing, and we managed to catch one of these and discover there were honeybees. The surveyor had a big net for catching insects, so we caught these and found out they were honeybees, and they were nesting in this aspen tree using one of these cavities. So that was really exciting because I'd never seen that before. And these are wild or feral honeybees. So they're not ones that have been living in a hive somewhere else. There are no hives on Dundragon and none nearby. So this is quite unusual to see. And one of them, as you can see here, had its pollen sacs completely full, those orange sacs on its legs, bringing pollen back to the nest as food for its larvae. So I've done a bit of research about this, and I found that it's generally reckoned that wild and feral honeybees have disappeared from most of Europe, with the exception perhaps of the Ural Mountains. And more recently, some research has found that they're still in Germany in a few places. And the theory is that a lot of old trees have been logged in most areas, and there's a notorious mite, a parasitic mite called Varroa destructor. What a name, Varroa destructor, which infects honeybees in domestic situations. So it's a problem for many beekeepers getting this parasitic mite. And the theory is the mite has also impacted wild populations, leading to the loss of wild and feral bees in many areas. So very exciting to see. This research in Germany showed that very clearly in 2 different sites of old growth woodland, mainly beech trees, that honeybees were nesting in disused woodpecker cavities. So it's a recognized behavior that occurs. But as far as I'm aware, it's not been documented anywhere else in Scotland before. So very exciting to see these wild honeybees utilizing this empty nest cavity in an aspen tree. Now, beech is not native to Scotland, but it's quite likely, I would say very likely, that in the past when aspen was more abundant and we had more woodpeckers, more woodpecker nests, that there were lots of honeybees, wild feral honeybees, utilizing some of those empty cavities. So here's a little bit of video footage as well, just to show you the bees in action, going in and out of their nest hole on the aspen tree. So just to summarize then, I've prepared a little simple flow chart which shows the ecological linkages I've been talking about. So at the top we've got aspen trees, and some of those get infected by the aspen bracket fungus. That makes excavation easier for woodpeckers to make their nests, and the woodpeckers rarely reuse their sites. So empty cavities are around, and in this case, honeybees have been occupying a cavity. And also off to the side there, very likely that wasps were occupying a cavity in one of those different trees that we saw earlier, and potentially benefiting a pine marten too. So this is an example of the role of a tree like aspen in the Caledonian forest. These are some of the linkages, as well as the other species I showed earlier, which indicate the web of interconnectedness in a forest ecosystem. And of course, the Caledonian forest has been reduced to about 1% of its original area. This would have been much more widespread and prevalent in the past. We've lost not just the trees, but the habitat for all these other creatures. So we need more aspens. Very important. We need to have more. They're a beautiful tree in their own right, but they're special habitat for many other species. They will benefit honeybees and lots of other trees as well. So this is this aspen stand at Dundregan again that I showed at the beginning. This is the one where the 4 woodpecker nests were in one of the trunks alone, where the storm damage was. So we want to see more aspens like that, you know, spreading throughout the Highlands once again. Very important. And Trees for Life has had a program of protecting and planting aspens grown from root sucker cuttings since 1991. And at Dundregan, in the tree nursery there, they're growing several thousand aspens a year. And they've also had some success now in growing aspen from seed. So it should become a much more important part of forest restoration work, of rewilding work, to plant aspens. And I would say the same is true in England and Wales as well. Aspen is an overlooked and forgotten species, but it's crucial for a wide diversity of wildlife. And I hope that in this presentation I've given you some sense of that. So thank you very much. Now I'll finish there.
Hello, I'm Jenny Connor from Dalton Moor Farm. Dalton Moor Farm is a vegan organic fruit farm in Dalton-le Dale, County Durham, in the northeast of England. It is also home to the School of Sustainable Living and Wellbeing. I've lived in the farmhouse here since 1992, and I bought some land around the farmhouse in 2011. And then I bought some more in 2015. In total, I have around 24 acres. It was previously arable farmland with wide open fields. Hedges and ditches have been progressively removed. There have been lots of pesticide and synthetic fertilizers used. While I was living in the farmhouse for all those years, I watched most of the wildlife around me disappear. So when I finally got my hands on some of the land, I set about trying to make an improvement. I put up fences to protect the land from vehicle trespass, which had become rather problematic. I reinstated ditches, and I stopped using pesticides and chemicals. I planted around 5 kilometres of new mixed native fruitful hedging, which is beneficial in providing food and habitat for the wildlife. By doing this, I have divided up the fields into smaller paddocks to provide a range of different habitats and provide more shelter. And I've planted thousands of trees. This includes 4 orchards. The first orchard was planted in 2013, so it's now given an apple crop. There's me planting the first apple tree. The other 3 orchards were planted in 2019, so are too immature yet, but will hopefully provide crops in the future. Of course, the orchards provide food for many of our resident species of wildlife, with a veritable smorgasbord of delicacies for them to share in the autumn. The trees are mixed apple varieties, and the purpose is to make cider and apple juice. We're recreating some wildflower meadows across the farm, and we're seeing a diverse range of plant species reappearing of their own volition. To help them along, I've also added some extra wildflower seeding just to give them a bit of a head start. Of course, we have cultivated flowers all around the farm gardens too for our pollinators. There's a 12-acre field which we're rewilding. It's a mixture of short and long grass, scrub and some trees. Mostly the trees have planted themselves or have been planted by someone. Jays and squirrels are our most likely secret tree planters. During the first lockdown in 2020, I rescued 1,000 oak tree saplings that were going to be destroyed. I got volunteers from the community to come and help plant about half of them out in the rewilding field, just to help things along a bit. So we got lots of local volunteers out into the countryside, learning about nature, engaging hands-on with nature, and learning how to plant trees, because we showed them how to do it. It was all done COVID secure, socially distanced. All the tools were sanitised. We'll invite the volunteers back every year in May for a picnic so they can see how things are progressing in the field. I feel that's important because these are their trees. These are the trees for the future, for the children who planted them. I'm not going to be around long enough to see them grow up into enormous oak trees, but hopefully some of the people who planted them, and in turn their children, will do so. So we're doing quite a lot here, trying to help nature create a range of different habitats to form a joined-up ecosystem that can sustain itself into the future. We have some wet areas which flood in very wet weather and then dry up again, providing a seasonal habitat that comes and goes. We're going to add 3 newt ponds this year in conjunction with Durham Wildlife Trust and Natural England. We have bee boxes, bug hotels, a hedgehog box, numerous bird boxes and owl boxes around the farm. I create giant stick piles amongst the hedgerows from the orchard prunings, and these grow bigger year on year. We're pleased to see a variety of animals returning. A heron visits occasionally, and we have seen deer, foxes, badgers, rabbits, lots of smaller mammals like stoats, squirrels, mice and voles, things like that. There are holes everywhere in the ground for their burrows. Some of these holes house bees or wasps. Being a vegan farm, we don't keep honeybees, but we do everything we can to encourage our native bumblebees, including occasionally rehoming nests that have been recovered from people's houses by a local pest controller. We also have increasing numbers and varieties of other insects. Butterflies, moths, beetles and spiders too, toads and frogs and many small hedgerow and meadow birds. What we're not really seeing many of yet is the larger ground nesting birds, and we'd like to see more of those. I did see a curlew the other week, which was exciting, but I'd love to see the lapwings come back. There used to be hundreds of them when I first moved here in 1992, but they disappeared many years ago, and I've seen very few over recent years. So I'd love to see those back, as well along with more partridges and pheasants too. We've got tawny owls at the moment around the farm. Barn owls used to live in our old barn, but the little owls used to live in the end of the farmhouse. Very sadly, they were all shot or poisoned in 2012 by the local cohort of idiots who don't care about anything. Luckily, I care, and the small team of us here, me and my husband Tom, and the lad who works with us, Philip, we all care, and increasingly the community around us is finding out that they care as well, which is good. At the School of Sustainable Living, we are trying to empower people by giving them skills and knowledge to be more confident, more self-reliant, and to live more sustainably. So we encourage them to move away from the overly dependent, throw-away, disposable society, to start to discover old skills and knowledge, to appreciate and care for what they have. And if there's something you can't use anymore, either make it into something else or let someone else have the use of it. Don't just chuck it away, and certainly don't chuck it on the ground. So we'll teach people how to forage, how to grow, how to make their own food, how to make their own clothes and homewares, how to make their own toiletries and cleaning materials. Generally, to start to move away from all the throwaway plastic-packed, mass-produced stuff that people have become so dependent on, to become happier, healthier people. Later this year, we should be able to offer off-grid accommodation. I hesitate to call it glamping, as there's nothing very glamorous about it, but it will be magical. We have 3 reclaimed wooden teepees where people can come for retreats and live more simply for a few nights, then hopefully take some of the things they've learned home with them. We try to look after our resources too, and we have 6 12,500 litre water storage tanks for the rainwater we harvest from our big barn roof, and we'll use that for irrigation around the farm and for our off-grid camping. We have solar panels on the farmhouse and a 15 kilowatt wind turbine. Between these we generate more than the electricity we use. And from the things we grow we make foods to drink and sell. We make cider, apple juice, fruit juices and a whole range of preserves, sweet, savoury and fermented. We make a vegan honey, that's Hunny, made by me, not by bee. It replicates the good qualities of Manuka honey without taking it from the bees. It does have a honey flavour note in its lovely, complex flavoured palette as well. I make a vegan lemon churd, that's churd not curd, because like honey, curd is a reserved description. And I make the lemon churd to order because it doesn't have as long a shelf life as the other products. Our fermented products are cider, apple cider vinegar, kombucha and fermented pickles. These are all delicious and really healthy. Fermentation with all those clever little microbes is something which is truly wonderful and good for us to know about, to live with and consume. Anything that is sold, bought from the farm, any experiences such as foraging, drum circles or mindfulness, or any of the other day or short or longer courses that we can offer once we come out of lockdown in 2021, anything purchased from the farm helps us to continue supporting the environment and supporting our community. My husband and I live on our pensions, and in fact spend most of those on the environment and developing the farm too. Everything is focused on helping nature and helping the next generations to learn how to live more sustainably and to still have a planet to call home. If you would like to visit, please do. You can find us on Google My Business and on Facebook. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can shop our products on Shop Happy or in the Discovery Durham shop in Prince Bishop's in Durham, or direct from me at the farm here. You can get our cider online from smallindependentcidermakers.co.uk. We do sell to trade and business to business, so please get in touch if that's relevant to you. We'd love to meet you in person, so do please come to visit. Thank you for watching.
Pleasure to be here to speak at the Trees and Bees conference today. My thanks to Sharon and Climate Action North for the invitation. I'm going to major on the trees side of things today. So I'm just going to go and dig in and get my talk out. And there it is waiting for me, splendid. And we're good to go. So I'm going to talk about delivering landscape scale afforestation in the UK's largest national park, the Cairngorms. So here is a map showing all the national parks in the UK. For those of you who are unfamiliar with them, the Cairngorms is the most northerly and indeed the largest. It's twice as large as the next biggest, which is the Lake District. It's over 4,500 square kilometres. It's actually one of the largest in Europe and is home to a quarter of the UK's threatened species. And of course, it's not an uninhabited wilderness. There are 18,000 people who call the national park home. Unlike national parks in many other countries, which are very often state-owned and have a sort of rather homogeneous land use and land ownership pattern, the Cairngorms National Park is really quite divided up amongst a whole range of different landowners. Some of them are public bodies, some of them are conservation NGOs, but the vast majority are private landowners, and they have quite diverse and varied land management objectives. And I guess one of the roles of the Cairngorms National Park Authority, the organisation that I work for, is to try and get the various landowners to help deliver the aims of the national park through a sort of combination of persuasion and influence and incentivisation to try and deliver those common aims of the national park. So woodland in the Cairngorms National Park is actually quite special. It's quite a distinctive feature of the national park. If you bear in mind that the #1 most common tree in Scotland is the North American Sitka spruce, and that there are in fact a whole range of other non-native conifers that are very much used in the forestry sector, then it's perhaps not surprising that the percentage of the woodland resource in Scotland that is native is actually only about 22.5% as the average. The other Scottish National Park, Loch Lomond and the Trossachs, is a bit higher at 25.2%. However, between the 32 local authority areas and the 2 national parks, there's only one area in Scotland that has a majority of its woodland resource being native, and that's the Cairngorms National Park. It's 69%. And that's partly a result of the fact that there are relatively large remnants of Caledonian pine forest in the national park, but also that the conifer tree of choice by the forestry industry over the decades has been the native Scots pine. It grows particularly well in the Cairngorms. However, woodland is actually a minority habitat in the national park. As you can see from this pine chart, the green area, it's only about 15% of the national park is covered by woodland. And actually the dominant habitat by quite some distance is heather moorland, which forms 40%. So like I say, woodland is very much a minority, but it punches well above its weight in terms of delivering for rare and endangered flora and fauna. So a study was done by Scottish Natural Heritage a number of years ago, and they identified that there were 223 species, and they could be fungi, plants, invertebrates, birds, for which the Cairngorms National Park was really quite significant. And by that, I mean 75% or more of the UK population is found within the Cairngorms National Park. And they divided those 223 species into habitat type. And this is what it looks like. Now, moorland, despite being the dominant habitat type, is only home to only one of those 223 species, a species called the northern bilberry redleaf, a fungus that grows on the leaves of the northern or indeed bog bilberry, and was found 800 metres up on the side of Cairngorm Mountain. Now, bog bilberry can grow in forest bogs, so it may just be that northern bilberry redleaf hasn't been found in forest bogs yet, so I'm not entirely sure we can even call it a moorland species. But of course, at the opposite end of the scale, we have woodland, which despite being only 15% of the land cover, forms 39% of the, or home to 39% of the rare and endangered flora and fauna. So really disproportionately significant. We know that woodland was once more widespread in the national park, and areas that are currently open were wooded in the past. This map dates from the 1590s. It's by a cartographer called Timothy Pont, and he identifies just right of centre of that image a woodland there. I hope you can see it. I'll try and get the clicker. There we go. The wood of Bracklach. The Bracklach is thought to come from the Gaelic word for a badger set. So a large extensive woodland of several hundred hectares, which by the time we get into the 18th century is no longer on the maps. And indeed, we also have the valley of the Eden Dawn water, which has got tree symbols all the way up, right round past Medder Hill, deep into the mountains. There were trees in that environment in the past. And yet, if we look forward to today, this is where the wood of Bracklach would have been. It's all treeless now. And this is the Eden Dawn water curving past Medder Hill into the mountains, and with the exception of a few trees planted around an old lodge, again, essentially treeless. So the maps can be a useful indicator in telling us that woodland was once more widespread. But of course, even in the 16th century, forest had already been decaying and declining for many centuries. Another thing I did was look at Gaelic place names in the D-side part of the eastern side of the national park. And what I've done here is I've plotted the woodland cover, the current woodland cover in green, and purple dots indicate where there's a Gaelic place name that recalls the existence of trees or shrubs. And that gives a real sense that woodland was once much more widespread and that the upland landscapes were much more heterogeneous in the past. But again, even these names, albeit a few centuries old, are probably indicative of already a long period of decline of woodland cover. So what's the national policy on woodland creation? And by national, I mean Scottish policy on woodland creation. What are we trying to do in Scotland with woodland at the moment? Well, the Committee on Climate Change recommended about a year or so ago that Scotland could and should be greenhouse gas net zero by 2045. Now that's significant because it's 5 years earlier than the UK as a whole. And that was recognising that Scotland has got very significant potential to both restore damaged peat bogs, which we know emit a large amount of carbon, and also Scotland has enormous potential to a forest and to create woodlands which can then sequester carbon. Up until recently, the Scottish woodland creation target has been 10,000 hectares per year, but in the last few years, that's gone up to 12,000 hectares, with a view to increasing that by 2024 to 15,000 hectares per year. But actually last year, Scottish Government decided that the target for 2024 would actually be 18,000 hectares per year. So there's going to be a large amount of woodland expansion happening in the years to come. The targets are getting ever more increasingly ambitious. So it's going to be really interesting to see how we can deliver this going forward. One of the 223 species for which the cairngorms is really important is the capercaillie, the world's largest grouse, which has unfortunately in the last 40 years or so undergone a massive range contraction and decline in population, so that the Cairngorms National Park is now home to 90% of the UK population. So we've a real responsibility to look after this bird, or we're going to lose it again, because we actually lost this bird originally in the 18th century before it was reintroduced. So for us, this is a real flagship species. It's a species that requires large amounts of well-connected, good quality woodland habitat. And so that's one of the reasons that we're looking to deliver that type of habitat in the national park, is to keep the capercaillie and indeed a wide range of other woodland biodiversity, keep them safe, and try and enhance the habitat for them. We're also really interested in looking at nature-based solutions, and reconnecting rivers and trees is another thing that we're really keen on. 100 years ago, the salmon fishing fraternity were appalled and panicked to see that water temperatures in the headwater streams of the River Dee measured 16 degrees Celsius. They thought that was terrible, really high temperatures, and it was going to be really damaging for fish stocks. In 2018, in one of the headwaters of the River Dee, a water temperature of 27 degrees Celsius was measured. And that's actually 4 degrees beyond the state at the time when fish start to enter thermal shock. They can't feed properly, they can't breed properly, and they're essentially starting to die. So this is one aspect of climate change which we really need to address, along with many others, of course. And how do we therefore keep our mountain streams cool? Well, one way of doing that, of course, is to create shade on our riverbanks by planting trees, which in a few years' time will be tall enough, and when they're in leaf in the summer, will cast enough shade on the watercourses to keep the temperatures down by a vital few degrees. And of course, in the autumn time, that leaf litter will come off the trees, and some of it will enter into the watercourses, will decompose, it will be eaten by invertebrates, which are in turn fed by other creatures, including fish. So you can see how having trees along our riverbanks is a good thing. It also helps to bind the banks and prevent erosion. But ultimately, when those trees die, they're going to fall into the river, at least some of them will. And of course, interestingly, the fishery boards have said, we used to spend all our time pulling trees out of rivers. Now we're actively putting trees back into rivers, because we know that having trees in there is a really good thing to do. It creates heterogeneity. It helps create deep pools with colder water. It helps create resting areas and nursery areas for fish. And of course, having that organic matter in the water is no bad thing as well. So we are seeing trees actively being put into these river systems, while we still don't have enough trees to die there naturally. So some interesting work going on reconnecting trees and rivers. We're really keen to see the return of montane woodland, a natural tree line in the Cairngorms, and perhaps there's no better area in the whole of the UK to explore the kind of expanse of bringing back a natural tree line. The Cairngorms represents the biggest area of Arctic alpine environment in the whole of the British Isles. And here we have a tree line at a place called Craigfiaclach on the western side of the Cairngorms, where the tree line is about 650 metres, lots of juniper scrub and actually lots of stunted Scots pine trees as well. And we've long considered this to be a fine example of a natural tree line, and at 650 metres is the cut-off point. However, nature hasn't read the rule book and doesn't realise that she's meant to stop at 650 metres. So what we've seen in the last couple of decades or so, particularly in places where grazing pressures have been dropped, where deer populations have been reduced, is that the pine trees are racing up the hill, way beyond 650 meters, up to 750 meters, in some cases going even higher than that. So these trees here in the northern corridors of Cairngorms, heading up some of them to 800 meters. So really interesting. Now, is that a facet of climate change that they're able to grow up there? Or actually, are they just responding to a relaxation of grazing pressures, which have been really high for many centuries? Firstly, through pastoralism, the grazing of sheep and goats and cows in their thousands from spring to autumn across the mountains. And then more recently, in the last century and a half or so, because of high deer grazing pressures, which have been stimulated by human hunting activity to have high numbers. Well, we can learn a lot by looking at a parallel universe just across the North Sea from Scotland, and that's southwest Norway. Now, until fairly recently, there's not been a great deal of comparison made between parts of the UK and parts of the Nordic countries, but I think these comparisons are really very instructive. So southwest Norway, the Norwegians in general, they refer to their geology as the Caledonian orogeny. So they've got Scottish rocks, which then gives you pretty much Scottish soils. They have a very oceanic climate, particularly along the western side, just like Scotland does. It's very wet, very windy, very peaty soils. And like in Scotland, the further east you go into the Highlands in Scotland, the drier and colder it gets. The same thing happens in southwest Norway. So if you want to make a comparison between the Eastern Highlands and the Cairngorms here, somewhere that's fairly cold and dry, then you do the same thing in southwest Norway. You move inland and you find an eerily similar landscape that's very reminiscent of parts of the Cairngorms. But of course, what that does do is bring into sharp relief some of the differences that exist between the two areas. And so in the Cairngorms proxy part of southwest Norway, here's what a native pine wood looks like. And we were shocked to see that the Scots pines are pretty tall, not at 650 meters, but at 850 meters. They're growing much higher up the mountains to particularly decent sized trees, really high up, about a couple of hundred meters higher up than they are in Scotland. But what was even more of a shock for us was to discover that it's not Scots pine that forms your tree line. As you might be able to see, the dark areas here are the Scots pine trees, the more feathery stuff. Well, this is downy birch, and downy birch, as it turns out, is a much sturdier, much tougher tree that can grow much higher up the mountain. So those trees were growing above 1,000 meters in altitude. They were about 5 or 6 meters tall. They're pretty slow growing. They're quite stunted and twisted, but it's a really interesting habitat that they help create, the sort of halfway house between woodland and moorland. An open birch forest, really interesting to see, and perhaps the major take-home message for us. And even once you get beyond the birch zone, it doesn't stop there. You end up with a willow zone. So in amongst those birches, hidden by the snow, will be a whole heap of willow shrubs. They keep going when the birches stop. So you should have a pine zone, a birch zone, and a willow zone. That's what you have quite commonly throughout Scandinavia, and I'm sure is almost certainly what we had in Scotland in the past. But we have lost that birch zone, and we've only got a few scraps of willow zone left, a few shrubs here and there clinging onto gullies and cliffs. And this is what that looks like in Norway. This is 900 meters up on pretty acidic, squelchy, peaty soils. A really rich, vibrant ground covering vegetation, various species of willow and dwarf birch and juniper, lots of crustose lichens and vascular plants and berry-bearing shrubs, a real riot of colour in the autumn time as well. And it's full of life, not just plants and insects, but also some really interesting bird life as well. And as you'll see, it's not wall-to-wall trees. The wet, really boggy areas stay open. They have a very short shrub layer, but nevertheless, it's all quite diverse and fairly productive stuff. And that open mountain birch woodland is regarded by the Norwegians as being the optimal habitat for golden eagles. It's where the golden eagles are hunting both mountain hare and the Norwegian equivalent of the red grouse, the willow grouse. And also, it's an environment that you'll frequently find wading birds living in. We tend in this country to think that wading birds and woodlands should never mix, but actually they do mix a great deal in much of the Nordic countries. So you find birds like whimbrels, snipe, greenshank living in amongst that montane birch zone, and even amongst the pine zone. I mean, I've encountered whimbrels alarm calling at me from the top of pine trees, and greenshank as well. And yet in this country, we tend to associate them with treeless bogs. And this little fella on the top left, the blue throat, there's about 500,000 pairs of these flying around in that montane birch zone. We've got, I think, literally one pair in Scotland. We've got lots of meadow pipits, but we don't have any of these fantastic looking things here, the blue throats. But I suspect we could have done in the past and could have again. So a really rich environment, like I say. And just by way of comparison, this is what 900 meters up looks like in a part of the Cairngorms today. This is on the Balmoral estate. It's called the stream that you see there disappearing under the snow. It's called the Altenda Cruy Ve. It starts at 1,000 meters up in the mountains and comes down to 880 meters before it joins another stream. And that altitudinal zone in southwest Norway is absolutely where you'd expect to find that montane birch zone. Now, I'm not picking on Balmoral here. The reason I've chosen this photograph is because of the stream. The stream's name is Gaelic, and it means the stream of the two birch trees. There are no birch trees there now, and I guess that the aim is quite a few centuries old, but I think it's indicative those last two dwindling birch trees may well have been our last remnant of a montane birch zone. It's clear that birch trees in Scotland can grow much higher than the 650 meters we've been used to thinking of. So what are we trying to do with woodland in the Cairngorms National Park today then? What are we trying, what's our aim? How are we trying to deliver this? So a slightly visually confusing map here. I'll just explain it briefly. The green areas show woodland cover today. The dark blue and the light blue areas, and indeed the beige areas, show where some of the areas where we would like to see woodland expanding into. The beige areas are specifically looking at montane woodlands, so the birch, the juniper, the willows, that sort of thing. We would like to see woodland expanding into some of these areas, and in tandem with Scottish Forestry, formerly known as Forestry Commission Scotland, we've agreed with them to enhance the woodland grant schemes, the forestry grant scheme, by 12.5%. So you get 12.5% extra money for creating woodlands in some of these areas. So for example, if you want to plant a native pine wood or a native broadleaf woodland, normally you would get £3,200 per hectare. In these areas, you can qualify for £3,600 per hectare. So that could make quite a difference to the bank balance and may well coax some landowners into considering woodland where previously they may not have. You might get a sense from some of the blue areas that we're really keen on trying to strengthen a forest habitat network across the national park. As you see, the green areas are pretty far flung. We've got relatively good forest habitat connectivity on the west side of the park and down the valley of the Dee on the east side, but actually not much connectivity between these areas. And from the point of view of functional connectivity, it'd be really good to have corridors and stepping stones of woodland between these areas to allow animals to disperse, to find mates, to recolonize lost areas. So it could be really useful from the point of view of capercaillie, or indeed the crested tit, another typical Caledonian pinewood species, which we have on the western side of the national park, but is completely absent from the pinewoods of the eastern side of the national park. And perhaps creating greater habitat connectivity might allow them to flow back in and reoccupy those habitats on the east side of the national park. So what sort of progress are we making then? So I mentioned at the beginning, we're about 15% woodland cover. The green areas was where woodland was in 2002, which is the year before the Cairngorms National Park came into being. By 2010, the woodland had expanded into the blue areas, and by 2020 had expanded into the red areas. So there's quite a noticeable trend of expansion happening across the park. And remember, this is 4,500 square kilometres. It's 6% of Scotland, so it's a big chunk of ground. So in some cases, we're looking at some really large woodland creation schemes. And I'm pretty sure that if I come back and talk to you in 2030, the picture will have changed very significantly again. I think we're going to see a lot more woodland, and I suspect the pace of change over the next 10 years is going to be quite a lot greater than over the past 10 years. So really exciting to see what the opportunities might be. And I know at the moment of at least half a dozen native woodland creation schemes, each of which are going to be over 500 hectares. And that's just the ones I know about at the moment. So lots of stuff to come. And so that woodland creation is happening through a variety of ways. In some places, it's through planting. As you see here, this is a very large open landscape where there's no seed source. You cannot really do natural regeneration here because there are no trees from which to naturally regenerate. And so they're essentially creating a seed source. They're planting a wide variety of native species, and we've got something like 15, 20 species of native tree and shrub in this part of the world that could be planted out and to create a seed source for the future. So planting is probably the most typical way of woodland expansion across most of Scotland. But it's quite an expensive business. It typically involves having to use fencing, although not in this instance. and fencing is expensive. You need to pay somebody to put the fencing up. You need to pay somebody to prepare the ground for planting. You need to buy the trees. You need to pay somebody to plant the trees. So it all costs quite a lot of money. What you can also see, hopefully, in this map, if you're peering closely enough, in this area here, we're starting to see the creation of potential corridor routes across otherwise treeless areas. Now, this is quite small scale stuff, not like the big scale stuff I just showed you. It's more like this. So this is an intensive grouse moor where trees are essentially not terribly welcome, but they will tolerate small levels of native woodland planting. And of course, this doesn't look particularly impressive at the moment, but in the years to come, those trees will grow up and will start to cast shades. So this is perhaps the smallest scale of woodland creation we're seeing. There are riparian woodland creation that's much bigger scale than this, much longer, wider areas, but these will all help to provide a seed source for the future in otherwise treeless areas. And we can start to see those riparian areas which are being planted to cast shade in the river, and actually a bit of a byproduct is they're starting to create a series of stepping stones that bring the connectivity between different river catchments closer and closer. So there's one potential corridor we could create between the Spey and the Dee. And equally, there's all sorts of other corridors we could be creating between river catchments that would strengthen a forest habitat network and allow species to recolonize and disperse. And in so doing, as long as they're along a river, they could also be delivering various nature-based solutions as well. It's not all about planting. Again, another really interesting aspect to the woodland here in the Cairngorms National Park is just how much of it is happening through natural regeneration. I would say that's quite atypical how much is happening by natural regeneration here. So that's not using fencing, you're not planting, you're basically controlling grazing levels, typically through culling deer, bringing deer densities down to more sustainable levels that allows whatever seed source you've got to start naturally regenerating and for those baby trees to then grow up without too much of a risk of them getting munched by herbivores. And so the National Trust for Scotland, for example, and their Mar Lodge estate, they have fairly dramatically reduced red deer numbers in what they call the regeneration zone, which is the part of the estate that surrounds remnant Caledonian pine woods. At one point they were above 20 per square kilometre. They've been brought down to below 2 per square kilometre. And the results are really quite impressive. So these red areas here show the pulses of regeneration of young pine responding to that reduced deer population. So this is the picture in 2011. This is what it looks like 5 years later by 2016. So the woodland is really beginning to expand out and thicken up. And that's 5 years ago. So we're still, we should be getting an update probably this year, but I would imagine the picture will have changed dramatically yet again. And it's not just in Mar Lodge. We're seeing this in other places such as Abernethy, managed by the RSPB. I showed you that the pine woods racing up that hill, that's land managed by Forestry and Land Scotland, but also Wild Land Limited that manage Glenfeshie, for example. There's lots of landscape scale regeneration happening in the park. So, and in fact, the photograph I've used as a backdrop for this slide is taken in Glenfeshie, albeit in the year 2000, before dramatic reductions of deer. So there's high grazing pressure going on there, and that granny pine, she's got exposed roots there, the heather is quite closely cropped, and there are no baby trees to be seen anywhere. So that's what it looks like when it's heavily grazed. But in terms of progress with woodland expansion in the Cairngorms, where are we at now? So we have a national park plan, a 5-year plan that covers the periods 2017 to 2022, and we have a target for that period of 5,000 hectares of new woodland. So basically 1,000 hectares per year. So up until October last year, we've seen 4,741 hectares approved through both planting and regeneration, which means that despite only being 70% of the way through our 5-year reporting period, we'd actually hit 95% of the target. I'm still waiting for figures by way of an update on this, but it seems to me very likely that we'll reach the figure if we haven't done already. And we've still got a year to go, so I suspect we're going to surpass our target pretty well. And we thought our target of 1,000 hectares a year was pretty ambitious to start with. Just to put that into some sort of wider UK context, from November 19 to November 2020, during that year, there was 1,400 hectares of new woodland created by just natural regeneration approved by Scottish Forestry in the Cairngorms National Park. So just natural regeneration, 1,400 hectares in 1 year. That is the same amount of woodland creation by all methods, natural regeneration and planting, in the whole of England for the year 2019. So that gives you some idea of where woodland creation is happening, and perhaps some indication of where it hasn't been happening in the last few years. And I'm just going to end with this photograph here, which is the same granny pine as in the previous photograph, but 14 years later, after several years of deer management, the heather is taller and there are baby trees all over the place, the length and breadth of the glen, and they will be racing up those snowy hillsides as well. So thank you very much for your time.
Hi, my name's Stephen Lipscombe and I'm the Kilda Head Wildwood Project Officer with the Northumberland Wildlife Trust. I've been on the project now for 2.5 years since it began its delivery phase, and in that time I've been responsible for all of the practical delivery of that project. I'm also heavily involved in the planning, the procurement, and also the engagement and outreach with local communities and organisations. I want to tell you a little bit today about how we've managed to achieve what we have done in that 2.5 years. Now, as you can imagine, with a project like Wildwood, the practical delivery of it requires me to spend a lot of time working with trees, stakes and tubes and moving them around site. There's a lot more to it, a lot more in the background, including a lot of the logistics, so working with delivery drivers and getting trucks in and out of the depot, also working with a quad to get stuff around site, but also a helicopter last year to try and get the stakes to where we need them on the side of an incredibly difficult to get at hill. Alongside that, I also need to work with all the different organisations that make a project like this possible. Forestry England are our partner, and incredibly important because they're the landowners on the site that we're working on. Natural England are heavily involved because this is an ecological project, and so we need to know what we're working towards, set guidelines that come down from government. But also we need to work with the next generation, so we're spending a lot of time outreaching with students from Northumbria, Newcastle and Cumbria University, also Kirkley Hall. We've also worked with local groups, local youth groups like Young Ecologists, Duke of Edinburgh groups, and also a group called Children North East. But by far and away the most important group that we work with are our volunteers. Now it's safe to say that without the volunteers there's no way a project like Wildwood could happen the way it does. Over the 2.5 years that I've been working on the project, we've managed to engage with over 80 volunteers. They've come and done 60 days worth of work with us, and that's equated to an incredible 2,630 hours worth of work on the Wildwood site. The scale, variety and intensity of the work our volunteers do as well is incredible. They've planted over 15,000 trees across a 100-hectare site. This is a site that has no tracks and no roads. Everything has to be carried in by hand. They've built a currick out of stone that will be used to house interpretation. They've monitored the vegetation on site. They've looked at reptile numbers and amphibians. They've also done bird monitoring on site. They've been out collecting willow cuttings in the middle of winter that have subsequently been planted out across the entire site. Not only that, they've managed to camp out overnight on site as well in the middle of summer. During this, they did bat walks. They foraged for their own dinner, and we looked at moth traps. Alongside all the amazing work we do with the volunteers, we really are trying within the project to try and give something back as well, to try and think of ways which the volunteers can take something tangible away from their time with us. To that end, we spent some time visiting other projects in the area to get a context of what we're doing and why it's important. Last year we went to Glenlude, a John Muir Trust project up in the borders of Scotland, and the year before that we were at Carafran, a project run by the Borders Forest Trust. Now both these projects are massively important and huge influences on what the Wildwood is trying to do. By showing the volunteers what we're doing, we hope to be able to show them what they are achieving, not now, but in 5, 10, 20 years' time. We're also trying to offer training opportunities within the project. All of the ecological monitoring that we're doing requires skills and methods that most people will not be familiar with, but we're trying to bring in experts to give that training to the volunteers who will do this monitoring. Last year we did bird monitoring training over 2 days. The year before that we did reptile monitoring and vegetation monitoring. And so into the future, how are volunteers going to be working on the Wildwood for the next 2.5 years? Well, we're going to continue with our training. We've still got many more taxa to be doing on site, to be monitoring. We're looking at mammals, both large and small, including bats. We're going to be looking at invertebrates and focusing on butterflies and moths. We're also going to be looking at some less known plants, mosses and lichens. Alongside that though, we're moving to a phase where we kind of start looking at some more obscure trees that we might be planting on site. And we may be looking at training up volunteers to help us grow these trees, through seed collecting to looking after the seed over winter and then propagating them into trees that we can plant on site. And as we move towards the end of the project, it's time to start looking at how is this really fitting in with the wider world of conservation. And to that end, we'll be going to look at taking trips to some of the big, really progressive projects that are going on around the UK. In particular, getting up to Scotland to look at Trees for Life and look at Wild Ennerdale over in Cumbria. But also looking at some of the big partnership projects like Cairngorms Connect. And this again is trying to give the volunteers an opportunity to see what they have been contributing to and what their work now may be making happen in 20, 30 and up to 100 years into the future. So it just remains for me to say a massive thank you to all of the volunteers who have engaged with the Wildwood project over the last 2.5 years. And I really sincerely hope that you will continue to engage for the next 2.5 years. And hopefully we'll see many more and get to achieve incredible things together. Thank you.
We're looking at a handful of very old pine trees here, and we have looked at the date of these, and they're at least 150 years old.
Looking at studies and from pollen analysis, we think that the Scots pine that are present predate Kielder Forest and therefore have either arrived there on their own accord or have always been present. So that makes these trees very rare.
Until recently it was thought that they'd all been eliminated, but this group are possibly the only survivors. And if so, they are of very considerable historical, ecological interest.
If we can collect the cones from the pine trees here, extract the seed, grow seedlings and plant them out, then that would contribute to this native woodland that we're planning to create.
In this district, no QR codes, cycle lanes, no tax, no porcelain rolling pins, no hashtags, hipsters, Hindus, and no chaos with Ed Miliband. Just waterfalls and curricks, cairns, grouse butts, sniggering springs, sheepfolds, long grown over pits, and fixed on musty price 2 shillings maps the names of Haggy No, of Weather Lair, of Baiting Hope and Blakeman's Law, Devil's Lapful, Plashet's Moor, of Myerdykes and Brands Walls, of Lamrig, Jedhead, Midfell, Big Flow. A goshawk, or a buzzard by the Sitka shoreline, watches through its citric eye. The Gore-Tex hominids troop down by Long Crag and by Peel Fell, by Monkside and by Ravenshill, by Wiley's Craigs, by Wiley's Syke, by Dan's Pike and by Scrathy Halls. Straddling the Coomston burn, putting a foot in the Scot burn, the creeping horror of a filled-up boot, paddling in the Carry burn, praying at the Kielder Stone to a big sky at the moment of its bruising. O sky, O ice-cold moss in your halo of water. We come down off the Grun by Farney Slack, chatting. We come down William's Clough, trailing midges. We use our camera phones. By under stony holes I hoard my pom bears. The bizzle and the trouting pass us by. We burst this dry exclosure with goodwill and breaking of Bratton, alarming martins. But air and tiredness begin in this wide, unpeopled theatre to stall our stride to show how talking starts, to know the ground of green law, but see the sound as silence grows, the forest parts, a doe goes by, the pines ignore the mammals gathered on the forest floor, me with the silent stretch of wild thyme, the cleft clough, the bird calls, shivering in the birch, the fell, the syke, the moor of sharp grass and heather hiding the patient moment while the humans pass.